if you excel in a big urban public high school,
Mm-hmm.
you are gold to an admissions office, right, in a strong university. Fundamentally, the point I'm making is that what counts is the school down the road, the school you almost certainly are constrained to sending your child to. It doesn't matter what the district is doing as a whole. It doesn't matter if the school you can't get your child into, the public school, a mile away is excellent. The question is your school. And the crucial point, if it's a public school, is look up its performance, right? Find out how it did in math, in reading, what it does relative to other schools. If you decide as a result that it's really not okay to send your child to that public school, then you have to look at private schools. And there are so many questions that you have to ask. The first one being, can you afford, right, the private school? I mean, even if it's a religious school, let's say a Catholic school, it's still going to be thousands of dollars unless you have some kind of scholarship or state award or funding. And if it's a more quote unquote elite private school, right, like Calvert down the street from where I'm speaking to you from, then it may be unaffordable. So whether it's good, bad, or indifferent doesn't really matter if you can't afford it. And so the real question then is, how do you know how good a private school is? And the answer is often you don't, because private schools often don't take state tests, right? So they take other kinds of tests. They may take Iowa or Stanford or some other test you've never heard of. And they often don't make those test results very easy to access anyway. So while as with the public school, you may find out how it's doing and the result may be disappointing to you as a parent. You may say, oh, no, I surely can't send my child to this public school. The private school, you've got the reverse problem. You don't know how it's doing and you may not be able to afford it. So, yeah.
There are some, and thank you for that insight. And, that was actually one of my first questions. The most common assumption that parents have these days is that regarding independent education, that if I send my kid to a private school, they're automatically getting a better education.
No.
So if we look beyond those marketing brochures and elite campuses, what does the data actually say about, say, student outcomes or success in the future when you're comparing the public versus private schools?
Well, first of all, at huge levels of generalizations, we can say that overall, Catholic schools, when we control for the economics of the students going into them and everything else we can control for, they are a little bit better on average than public schools. Protestant fundamentalist schools, less so. They don't meet the average performance of public schools. But those are huge generalizations, right? They don't actually tell you whether the Catholic school down the street is better than the public school down the street. That's the problem. So if you say to a parent, well, choose your Catholic school because the Catholic school is the only private school you can afford. And of course, on average, they're going to be better than your public school. That is a meaningless statement to a parent. What the parent has to try to figure out is how good this Catholic school is, right? The one that I can afford to use. And the answer, I'm afraid, is to do homework as much as you can, find out what test results are available, right? What is the absenteeism rate? What is the graduation rate? The problem with the elite private schools is they may cost you $50,000 a year, right? I mean, this is not an option for most parents. So in a way, the question of how good, right, is the beautiful private school, with its green lawns and its luxurious science lab, it's irrelevant. It doesn't matter to you because you can't afford to go there. If you're a wealthy parent, you're probably, in all likelihood, you've got a very different choice set. First of all, you can afford to go to a public school district where the public school is very good. Because if you're a wealthy parent, you can afford the real estate to be in a district, right, where there are other well-off parents, and the schools, the public schools, are well-funded and so forth. And you can afford to choose to send your kid to an elite private school. Now, there may be other non-academic reasons to send your child to a private school. For example, if you are a devout religious believer, you may say to yourself, look, I'm more interested in the values and the belief of a school, and I'm not as worried whether it's stronger or weaker in math. Yes, I want my kid to learn math, but to me, what counts most are the values of the school. In which case, that if you're a Catholic or you're Jewish or Muslim, then the local Jewish school is going to be attractive to you for non-academic reasons, right? And that's a very private choice. Obviously, all being equal, you'd rather have a religious school that has strong academic outcomes. But for some parents, that may be more important, right? The religious. And for other parents, transport will be an issue, right? So it's all very well saying, well, there's that Catholic school 3 miles away, right? But I only have one car. I can't get my kid, I can't take her. There's no good public transportation. It's going to take her an hour to get to school and every day. I'm not going to do that to my child. So, the first answer to your question is just on academics, but there are often other factors.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think a lot of people, at least in the Howard County area, if they're sending their kids to private school, it's either because of religious reasons or it is the elite. I mean, let's talk about the brick and mortar fancy campuses.
Right.
Parents get so enamored by all of the big Olympic sized pools and the art and theater programs, the great studios. Like, for example, like if I look at McDonough, it has 800-acre campus and it's lush and green and beautiful. Same goes with Bryn Mawr and Gilman. Do these extra facilities, like the elite facilities, actually help in building the foundational math or reading or cognitive development?
The short answer is no. If you are a wonderful tennis player and the school has a fantastic tennis coach, and you become an A-rated college tennis player one day, and you've got the scholarship to get into college, right, on a tennis scholarship, then that tennis court makes a big difference. But that's for 0.1% of the children. The real question is that elite private school, the graduates of that elite private school are competing with the graduates of lots of other elite private schools, right? For entrance, presumably into competitive colleges. That's why their parents are sending them there and paying the huge bucks. And frankly, to an admissions officer at an elite university, that's not a plus, right? I mean, they know about these schools and they know the advantages they provide. Now, whether you would have gotten a top SAT score without that school, whether the school helped you get coaching for the SAT or the ACT or the AP, the real question is, what is the school doing to add value academically to your experience? And the real answer is we don't know in most cases. We take it on faith that a very expensive private school has really good teachers. How do we know?
But this has been my recent learning that the private school teachers are not required to have a college education. They could just have any certificate. On the other hand, a public school teacher is thoroughly, they go through full checks and there's diligence and they're supposed to have a college degree.
Well, yes and no. First of all, let's go with the public school first. It is true that in theory, you're supposed to be certified. Now, there are lots of exceptions. You can be emergency certified. You can be provisionally certified. A provisionally certified first-year teacher, good luck, frankly.
Yeah.
So it's no guarantee. The second thing is our teacher prep programs that give create this route to certification. And I was dean of one of the largest in New York. Are not good. It's textbook learning. It's one semester usually of actual practice in a school, supervised often by an adjunct professor who's been 20 years out of the classroom and some overstressed, harried school teacher, and those two adults don't communicate. So the poor young teacher, would-be teacher, gets two contradictory pieces of advice. It's a terrible system, and I've been a very long-standing critic. compared to what other countries do for teachers, it's incredibly bad. So the research is very clear. Having a certification does not make you a better teacher,
Yeah.
right? Now, on the private side, you're absolutely right. The private school can more or less hire anybody they want. Now, some private schools will hire PhDs to teach, right? Some will hire the friend of the principal, right?
Yeah.
So again, the problem is trying to figure out what the real caliber of the education is.
Mm-hmm.
And often the data is from these elite private schools is really hard to get. So for example, it will say 85% of our graduates went on to college.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's meaningless. 4-year college, 2-year college, competitive 4-year college, top 100 colleges. So pressing for meaningful data is really tough in some cases. I mean, I'm generalizing, right? Some private schools are more transparent than others.
Some do advertise, like they cherry pick the good scores and advertise that.
Exactly. But again, let's say they use SATs. Right. Unfortunately, there's a high correlation between socioeconomic background and SAT scores. Right. The top 2% of SAT scorers come enormously from families earning $250,000 a year or more. And there are lots of reasons for that.
And what would those reasons be? Is it just better coaching?
It's a whole generation plus generation plus generation of better housing, better medical care, two-parent family structures. It's a huge difference of background built over multiple policies of housing segregation, racial segregation, economic segregation, and you are either the beneficiary of that or you are the victim of that. But the result is that your likelihood of being from a very poor family and being a top SAT scorer are far, far smaller, right? So the school's not doing anything. It's just not damaging you. But it's basically saying, well, we have a group of affluent kids whose families have been able to do this, that, and the other, and they get high SAT scores. Well, wow, right? What a big surprise. The real question is, are the teachers good teachers? Are they adding academic value? And even if you aren't able to ask that, and the only question you can ask is, well, what is the percentage of your high school graduating class that gets into a top 100 college, a top 50 college, right? Good luck. I've been surprised how hard that is to find out.
Dr. Steiner, a lot of these elite schools market themselves. Actually, this is one of their top marketing strategies, that we are Ivy League feeders. And our counseling sessions are one-on-one, we do like very good counseling, teacher to student ratio is less. So they kind of attract you with all of these.
But do they have numbers? Do they have decent statistics?
Yeah.
That's the only thing that matters, right? And I want to go back to a point I made before because I didn't emphasize it enough. Universities aren't stupid, right? I happen to be a professor at Johns Hopkins University. Their admissions office is sophisticated, right? So is the one at Harvard and Yale and Stanford and MIT and Dartmouth and Brown and Princeton and, so on and so on.
But they do have legacy admissions. A lot of these Ivy League students.
Yes, they do. Johns Hopkins does not. And legacy admissions are under pressure. More and more universities are saying no to them. But a legacy means it doesn't matter which school you went to, right? As long as you do decently. So the legacy isn't anything the school is adding to.
True.
The bottom line is you are being compared to other candidates from schools like yours, right? I used to be a professor at Boston University. They had a very sophisticated mathematical process whereby they would run what we called inflator or deflators based on the school you came from. So let me put it another way. If you excel in a big urban public high school, you are gold to an admissions office, right, in a strong university. Now, it may be harder to excel, right? But remember, if you're at an elite private school, you're trying to excel against other kids who are at an elite private school, right? And the expectation is all of you start way ahead of the game. So you've got to differentiate yourself even more in that crowd.
But what about if you're living in a wealthy neighborhood? The private schools are great. Sorry, the public schools are great.
Yeah.
Would the admission officers also take
Yes.
that into
Yeah,
account?
absolutely. So my sister is a professor at Columbia, but she lives in Princeton because her
Mhm.
husband's a professor at Princeton. And there's no question that the public schools in Princeton
Are fantastic.
are really good.
Yeah.
Fantastic, maybe not, but really good.
Yeah.
And of course, again, the admissions officers aren't stupid. They understand that. So what they're trying to do is look at you not just as a number,
Mhm.
but as a person who comes out of a context, right? After the Supreme Court ruling, we can't take race into account anymore. But socioeconomics and, writing about the world you come from in your application essay is standard.
Mhm.
Right. And, certainly many public schools could do a better job of supporting student applications. And that is a problem. They're not as sophisticated in the support they give to their graduating students. And there's one counselor for the entire school. And,
Yeah.
right, there are problems. I don't want to sugarcoat this. There are reasons why you go to an elite private school that does everything it can. I'm just pointing out that you are in a different pool of applicants that, one more, I'm Jewish, right? So I can say this. If you are a white Jewish boy from, an elite private school in New York City, good luck, right? Because there are a heck of a lot of other bright Jewish boys from elite private schools in New York
New
City.
York City. Yeah. No, that makes total sense. Dr. Steiner, what about, I know we've talked about the brick and mortar part, but
Yeah,
some of these private schools in the Maryland area, like Bryn Mawr, Gilman, and all,
right.
have really good summer camps. Okay. And the parents put their kids for these few weeks. They come out with very great experiences. And then they wonder if the summer camps were so good, will the everyday teaching in school throughout the year also be as
Yeah,
good?
we don't know. I mean, there's so much we don't know. Obviously, these are for-profit schools.
Mm-hmm.
They pride themselves on their catchment, right, of the families that always send their kids to Gilman,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And the main pitch is send your kid to Gilman because your fellow professor at Hopkins is also sending their kid to Gilman. And you want your kid to be with people like that.
Networking. That's another
It's networking. It's networking. And if your kid excels in volleyball, then we will, right. If your kid is successful in squash, whatever. If their kid is good at computer science, we'll have a computer science camp for them.
Mhm.
And again, this is not untrue. They're not lying. These are true statements. My point is simply that, yes, you're going to get the advantages that money can buy. And money can buy real advantages. The
Mhm.
only point I'm making is don't assume that because you go to Gilman, you're going to walk into Harvard. Because there are a lot of Gilmans in the United States. And that's the point I'm making.
But for someone who's a sportsman
Yeah,
or very
right.
good at art and is getting that, amazing campus to
Yep,
practice
yep,
on and they can create a great art portfolio using
yep.
the studios in these schools, it definitely makes a big difference in your college admissions, right? Because the
Yeah.
quality is going to be much better.
Yeah, well, it depends. Again, I don't want to be Pollyanna-ish. It isn't easy, but we happen to have supported a young man who came from a very underprivileged background, who went to a very mediocre public school in Baltimore City and ended up with a full scholarship to Hopkins. Now, he had to work really hard to enable himself to get computer training at another school, right? Not his native school, to get the support for his skills. It
Mhm.
took, whereas an elite private school would have just given them to him, right? He had to use that initiative. I'm convinced that initiative was part of what made him attractive to Hopkins, right? So, yes, it's harder. No question. Please, I don't want your audience to misunderstand. The private schools are selling something real.
Mm-hmm.
And they're selling it as an ease of access, right? You don't have to go through 18 hoops to get a good summer camp. You don't have to go through 20 hoops
But
to
is it
get.
worth the 50,000 price tag? That I just cannot wrap my head around that.
Well, it may be, right? It depends what you want. First of all, and let's not underestimate this, as a parent, this is
Mm-hmm.
really fundamental. You don't want to say to yourself, I let my kid down, right? It is easier to say to yourself, I bought them the best education in this city. Right? By best, I mean the most expensive, the one with the most facilities, right? The one where a lot of kids look like the children of the people I'm carpooling with, right? If the kid then screws up, right,
You've done your bit.
you've done your best, right? Whereas if you send your kid to the local public school on the grounds that you believe in American public education, right? And you don't want to use your wealth to, yeah, it's a more complicated conversation you're having with yourself, right? Are you using your child as part of your own social agenda? Of course, you are the other way around as well. It's a different agenda.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of this has to do with the stories we tell ourselves as parents.
Mm-hmm. What about networking? I mean, I've heard millions of people say that path to success is having a good network. And these schools automatically give you that. In my opinion, you could put an introvert in one of these schools and they would come out without even knowing one or two people or creating that network for them. So, do you think the network is really helpful?
Well, it depends. What is the network for? So let's take an example of somebody who goes to an elite private school, and then they're not particularly distinguished when they come out, right? They go to a state college, let's just say, which is
Mhm.
fine, of course, or they go to a third ranking private college, not in the top 300, okay? Which is still expensive, and
Mhm.
they get a degree, and then the question is, what are they going to do with their lives, right? And they made some good friends. Now, what does networking really mean? If the friend ended up at Princeton and is now working for Goldman Sachs, is that friend really going to be helpful to me as I come out of my state college with my degree in accounting? I
No.
mean, what does networking mean? Networking probably isn't going to get you into Harvard, right? Unless your network includes somebody who knows somebody who's on the board of governors, who makes a phone call to somebody who makes a phone call. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. Of course it does. But by and large, that universe is shrinking.
Yeah.
Right? Schools are, as I say, that kind of way in, which was never, I mean, it was large. I don't want to gild the lily. There were a lot of kids who got in that way, but that number is shrinking. And the number of schools that use that route is shrinking. So the real question about networking is, for what? At what point? What do you think it means?
And you're kind of hanging out to your point that a lot of parents use this like for social agendas where they want
Right.
to be hanging out in the right club.
Exactly.
And I've seen so many parents, this kind of boost their self-esteem that they
Right,
send.
it's about them. It's
It's
about
about
them.
them. Yeah, the
That's
kids
right.
have
And
no
that's
clue.
that's fine. I mean, as long
Yeah.
as you're honest with yourself, right? So
Yeah.
I'm going to send my kid to school X because I want to be able to say to my best friend whose child's already at X, mine's there too, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I will see you at parents' night, and I will see you at the football game, and we're going to go to the booster party, and I'm going to be part of the fundraising committee, and et cetera, right?
Yeah.
And again, that's part of a lifestyle. Money buys lifestyles. Its capacity to buy entry into the top universities is less than it once was. It's not zero. And for some schools, and let me be clear about this, most big public urban high schools, the risk of falling through the cracks, right? The risk of ending up with nothing is probably much higher than if you were in one of these expensive private schools, because as a parent, you've got more clout in a private school. Not inevitably, I want to say that, not inevitably, but at least in theory, right? Good luck going to a 5,000 student big urban public school and making a huge fuss and saying, you're not you're letting my kid off the hook, you're not challenging my kid, whatever. The chances are, unfortunately, with exceptions, wonderful exceptions, that not much will happen. And so that's the risk with public schools is you're just not going to get the special treatment.
You're not going to get the special treatment. However, I think there's a lot of guarantees in the public school, like the IEP 504 plans, right, for neurodivergent kids.
Right. But again, let's
Which
be
you don't get in-
realistic. I mean, the academic outcomes for tracked kids who are not in the college track, right? And unfortunately, a lot of kids with IEPs always have IEPs, and that's a big issue we can come back to.
Mhm.
It doesn't look great, frankly, for their academic prospects. Now, really strong public charter schools pride themselves on getting many children off IEPs and mainstream them, right? So I had the privilege of being on the board of one of the top charter school organizations in New York City. They proudly show you the diminished percentage of children on IEPs.
Dr. Steiner, I'm not sure a lot of the people in my audience know what a charter school is. Could you explain
Certainly.
that to us?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So a charter school, and there are exceptions like everything in American education, but by and large, a charter school is a public school that is not run by the public school district. It is run by a private organization, but it is subject to all of the same testing requirements that a regular public school is. So you're still going to take the state test, and usually you're going to have to do most of the things public schools do. What you do not have to do is fill in all the forms, meet all of the regulations, right? You don't have to go through all the red tape. You have more autonomy over curriculum, for example. You don't have to follow the district curriculum. You have somewhat more autonomy, usually a lot more autonomy on who you hire. So you don't have to hire unionized teachers if you're in the Northeast. You don't, there may be rules on certification or not, depending on the state. But by and large, think of it as a public school with far fewer restrictions, requirements, constraints from the district.
Okay,
It's
and
like
these, of course, for profit.
No, they're mostly non-for-profit. There's they are paid by the public. They are public schools, so they are paid by the public. They may be paid a little bit less than the dollars going to the regular public schools because many of them use the special needs supports of the public school district. So let's say the public school pays $20,000 a kid to the regular public schools. It may pay $12,000 a kid for the for the charter schools, the public charter schools. It's still public money because there are other benefits that the district is providing to the public charter school.
Like which ones?
Like special needs, like transportation, other things of that kind. So huge majority of charter schools are non-profit public charter schools.
So if you were to pick between the three, which one do you think?
Depends on the city, depends on the charter school.
So we're talking about Maryland.
There's one McKenna excellent charter school in Baltimore. I have not reviewed the results recently of all of the charter schools in Maryland. Maryland has an uneven record on charter schools, partly because they are authorized by the public school district. In other words, the public school district can say no. It's complicated. I was on the state board in Maryland, so I went through all this. But mostly, in most states, charter schools are authorized by semi-independent bodies like universities. Here, they're authorized by the regular public school district. So Sonia Santelises, when she was in charge of Baltimore City, her team could say no. And of course, it wasn't in their interest to say yes, because they're losing funding, right, to that charter school. So by and large, Maryland does not have the most distinguished charter schools, with wonderful exceptions. I repeat, with wonderful exceptions. I'm afraid, again, the answer is homework, right? You have to look up how the charter school is doing. But again, if you are zoned into, and I use the word zone in a practical sense, meaning you really have no real option, but to send your kid to the local terrible public school, you've looked it up, and there are no kids proficient in math.
Mm-hmm.
It is almost certain that if you can get your kid into the charter school, you should.
You should. Okay, that makes sense. But is there a risk that these charter schools and even private schools actually, because, and you've done a lot of work on curriculum,
Right.
because it's not standardized, it's not checked by the state, is there a risk that they're not meeting the foundational, say, national metrics?
Well, the advantage of the charter school, in theory, it can be closed for bad performance. And many are, right? Not so much in Maryland, but for example, in Arizona, in the early days of charter schools, endless people opened charter schools, right? If you could smoke a mirror, you could open a charter school. Well, understandably, a lot of them were terrible. Now, to the credit of the state, they were closed down. And I mean, many of them were closed down. Charter schools are accountable for their results. Now, we have schools, public schools, regular public schools that do much worse than many of those charter schools, or at least as badly, and they're not shut down. Why not? Because it's very, very difficult politically to shut down a regular public school.
Well, where else would the kids go also, right?
Exactly. They have to be bused further away.
Yeah.
People feel loyalty to their public school. They're part of the social fabric. It's one of the ironies that parents, understandably, are very, very reluctant to allow their regular local public school to close. But the other side of that is charter schools that constantly do badly are likely to be shut down.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Dr. Steiner, let's talk about the flip side. Like public schools often, they get a bad reputation in the media that they kind of have like a lot of standardized testing and the teachers are teaching so that the kids can test well. What is your opinion on that? And private schools pick and choose what tests they want to.
Absolutely. So there are problems both sides, and I'll try to be as brief as I can about this huge topic. But
Yeah.
First of all, many public schools have more tests than the state requires. Many more tests. This is something I really, drives me insane.
Mm-hmm.
The state, what the federal government says is you have to test reading and math once a year from grades 3 through 8 and once in high school. And you have to test science 3 times during K-12.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. That's it.
But they're doing way more than that.
They're doing way more than that. Then the state comes in and says, well, that's not good enough. We want these interim tests. Then the district comes in and says, well, that's not good enough. We want iReady. We want MAP. We want end of this unit. We want whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So you're quite right. By the end of the day, they're taking 100 tests a year, and it's insane, right? Most countries in this world, I grew up in England. I did go to public school in New York. I went to a private school in New Haven. I've seen it all, if you will.
Yeah.
In England, you're tested twice. Once when you're 15, once when you're 17, 18. Most countries do that. There is absolutely no evidence that they do worse than the United States, and many of them do better. So, yes, we test too much. On the other hand, there is at least that public thermometer, right, that says this school, 80% of the kids were not proficient in math, at grade level math. Now, as far as teaching to the tests, the best way to raise your score, your test score in reading, is not to teach the test. It is to teach lots of good literature, right? That's a whole other subject. So the problem is that if you drill kids on find the main idea, right? They do badly on tests that find the main idea, because if you don't know what the main idea is about in a text, you can't find it. There is no such skill as find the main idea in general. It's only find the main idea in a text. So we have a huge job to do to persuade teachers to teach good content and forget about the test, because the more you teach that good content, the better your kids will do on the test.
The content, I would say that, and I live in a pretty good area in Clarksville in Maryland. The schools are really good here on average. However, I do have a problem with the fact that the teachers are turning on YouTube videos to teach kids. I mean, yes, there is a little bit of the teaching towards the end, but they're just turning on the YouTube video.
No, that's a different problem. That is, when I was Commissioner of Education for the state of New York, I introduced something called Engage New York, which was the first high-quality curriculum online available for free in English and in reading and in math. Now, across the country, there's been a shift since then to more use of high-quality curricula. It's not uniform, but now MSDE, the Maryland State Department of Education, is pushing districts, and most of them are moving the public schools to using high quality materials. The teachers don't always use them. You're absolutely right. They often still mix them with Pinterest, teachers pay teachers, whatever,
Yes.
right? Often because the kids are way behind and the teachers worry that they can't manage the good curriculum. And we're trying to help them get better at accelerating kids so that they can manage the good curriculum. So the problem you identify is correct, but it's not about the testing. It's about the reluctance, right, to use rigorous materials. So that's a different problem. In private schools, to come back to your earlier point, it is true they can use whatever they want. Some of them do use these same high quality curriculum. Some of them don't. Some of them, so Catholic schools, for example, use often materials from Sadlier, which is a long established Catholic publisher, right? And some of those materials are quite good, as it happens.
Yeah.
Others use materials from other publishers that frankly aren't very good. So part of the problem is you probably know much less as a parent about the materials that your private school is using, unless you make a pain of yourself before your kid is enrolled and try to find out, right?
Yeah. Which I don't think they disclose in detail anyway.
No, they don't. They just say, trust us, pay us a lot of money and trust us.
Yeah.
So, and it's not always obvious, by the way, what the public school is using, but if you have an internet, you can find out, right? You can go and find out what Baltimore is using Reveal in math. That is available information. You know, they're using, you know, Wit and Wisdom in reading. You can find that out, and you can look those curriculum up, and they're pretty decent curriculum. So it's all about how well the teachers use it, right? You can have a good curriculum, but if the teacher's doing what you just said, if they're still mixing it up with Google and Pinterest and then it doesn't matter, right? The curriculum isn't doing any work. In the end, here's the really biggest problem for your audience. The biggest problem of all, not is private versus public, though that's a big issue, as you rightly say, is that in the United States, the variation within any given school of teacher quality is one of the highest in the world. In other words, in most countries, there are differences between schools. Of course there are, right? Schools in very affluent areas with lots of funding, yes, they can afford better facilities, better science labs, you name it. The kids are wealthier, they tend to do better. Surprise, surprise. What is amazing is that in all of America's schools, in almost any school, you may have absolutely brilliant teachers and absolutely terrible teachers, and you probably do. You can go to the OECD that runs the International PISA exam. They run endless data on this. It's stunning.
Yeah.
The American spread of teacher effectiveness in any given school, and let me put this in terms your audience will be familiar with. What does it mean to have a teacher, your child's teacher, in the top 25% of effectiveness versus in the bottom 25%? And I want to stress this happens every year. You are very likely to have one of those teachers. The difference is 6 months of learning a year, every year. So
But who's evaluating these teachers? No one is evaluating these teachers.
Yeah, we can, because we can look at what's called the value add, right? So if you start with a bunch of kids, all of whom scored 100 on the test at the end of last year, how do they score at the end of this year? Based on the teacher they have, right? There's no other difference.
I mean, I feel a lot of the hard work is done at home as well, but...
Well, yes, but in the end, you know, we know background conditions, family conditions can have a big impact. But within a given public school, the background conditions of the kids are likely to average out. They are. I mean, they're just too many kids for it to make a big lumpy difference.
Yeah.
So we know that some teachers can boost learning by 6 months, 7 months a year compared to other teachers. We know, we've got endless data to that effect. And I can give you, any of your readers are interested, they can email me, I'll give them the data. That is a huge impact. And the problem is you don't know. Right? As a parent, you have no idea whether the math teacher you're about to put your kid into the hands of is terrible, mediocre, good, or brilliant. And that's a big national problem, right? Our teacher preparation, our our compensation, our training, our selection of teachers is so bad that the range is huge. And
Yeah.
that's the truth.
I would agree with you. I've also seen it in real life. So
Yeah.
I see two very different categories of teachers.
And everyone in between.
Yes. Dr. Steiner, what are some biggest data backed pros of a well funded public school that parents often overlook when they're making this decision?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I know tests have a bad name.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a long history of that, which I was part of, which is that the unions in the Northeast made common cause with affluent parents, especially in Long Island, for whom state tests were irrelevant. And there was this huge orchestrated effort to sort of badmouth tests.
I actually don't mind the test for my kids. I
No,
mean,
and the bottom line is, let your audience hear this.
Yeah.
There are very, very strong research studies that still show that better test results correlate to much higher income, higher employment, higher everything 30 years later. So don't give up on test results. Don't be afraid of looking up what your public schools results are. They mean something. They really do. I'm not downplaying social and emotional support, arts support. I was privileged to be director of education at the National Endowment for the Arts. I believe in lots of other non-academic skills, but academics matter. So don't be afraid of academics. They matter. The second thing is to walk into a school. I can't stress this too strongly. I've had the privilege of being in many, many, many schools, right? When I was commissioner, that was part of what I was privileged to do. I've done it as a professor at Hopkins. We were in schools last year across Maryland, working with the state on mathematics. You can tell a lot, right? Is the school spotless? Are kids in class? Is someone checking if they're not in class? Right? Is there chaos in the corridors? Are you able to visit a classroom, right, and see what kind of learning is taking place? Really experienced observers tell me they can tell within 10 minutes of a school visit, right, whether the school is likely to be well run, badly run, right? It matters, right? Your feeling about a school. Is the principal at the door welcoming the children, right? Or are they locked up in their office with piles of paper? Are the principals walking around and actually looking at the classrooms? We would assume so, but don't assume it, right? So a school is a cultural institution, right? It's not just teacher once the door shuts. It's the whole sense of, is there a learning culture going on? And you can tell a lot by visiting a school. I would never send a child to a school I hadn't spent some time in. And I know it's tough for parents, especially, less affluent parents who may be trying to hold 2 jobs, 3 jobs. Not easy to find time, right, to go to a school. But given the number of hours your kid's going to spend there, and given how incredibly important that thing is going to be to your kid's life, right? We spend more time, worrying about our grocery store. Now, that's important too, right? But, we can tell a lot by a supermarket by walking into it. You can tell a lot by a school.
I think a lot of parents buy houses in areas where they know this public school system or the public schools are good, like they get a 9 on 10 or 8 on 10. So the diligence is kind of done by the state, like you mentioned, the report.
Yeah, again, don't be lazy. I was part of the state board when we developed the state rating. It was constrained by law in lots of complicated ways I won't bore your audience with. It's a lot more, it's more complicated than it should be. Don't worry about the state rating. Look at the math scores. Look at the reading scores, right? Cut through the nonsense. There may be lots of reasons why it's a 4 or 5 star school, right? What matters is what it does with the kids it has.
Dr. Steiner, you've brought a very, very important point. And yes, look at the math scores, look at the English scores. For me, I think what matters to me the most is that my child is happy in school, right? If the school is doing well in their math scores and reading scores, but are not able to provide that emotional support, or there's no legal accountability for kids who need extra support, I would say that school is not good. And that's just my opinion. What do you think?
I think happy is a complicated term. Most parents when we think back on our best teacher, we don't necessarily say we were the happiest in that class. We say we were pushed by somebody who cared about our learning. And we're happier later that we went to that class. Now, I'm not talking about being desperately unhappy. I'm not talking about being in a classroom where the teacher doesn't give a you know what, and where she's AWOL half the time and as absent as I want to be as a child. But I am talking about there are teachers who make me feel really good by lowering their expectations and making the place fun. That's not happy in a good sense. So what I want is a rigorous education that from somebody who cares that I learn. Right. And part of the problem we're addressing is that when I ask teachers, elementary, middle school teachers in America, why they became teachers, most of them say they love kids. When I ask the same question abroad, it's because I love math. I love literature. I want to teach children these wonderful things. That's a very deep difference. So part of the challenge is, does your elementary school teacher actually like math, right? We have seen a lot of elementary school teachers, I'm sorry to say this, who are math phobic. Not only do they not like math, they actually dislike
math. And they're teaching math.
Yeah, they're all teaching math. So, if you're putting your kid into a local school, elementary school, go and look at the math class, right? If you possibly can.
Wow, that's eye-opening. And I know we had time, Dr. Steiner,
Right.
but I just have one or two more questions.
Yeah, please. I'll be brief.
Regarding the facilities or accommodations that these schools provide in terms of legal accountability and support system, can you talk a little bit about the differences in the public and private schools?
Yeah, I mean, the public schools are constrained by law. They have to produce an individual education plan under a number of circumstances. Sometimes that means pushing you out of the inclusive classroom. Usually it means getting special additional help within the classroom and then maybe some additional help. And again, how that's executed is everything, right? Just the fact that you're on an IEP doesn't mean a whole heck of a lot. What matters is how it's...
And the accountability as well.
The accountability, absolutely. But let's, again, not lie to ourselves. For many kids who are put in those tracks, and I hate to call them tracks, but that's what they are, they never get out of them. And that's a real problem, right? I mean, many times we give an IEP to a third grader because we didn't teach them properly from pre-K to grade 3, right? So they're way behind and we slap IEP on them, and it's actually the right thing to do because at least we'll get them some extra help. But it's not because they're cognitively impaired. It's because we failed to teach them, right? I mean, they're 7, 8, 9 years old, and we didn't teach them to read.
But the public schools are also dealing with such a huge variety.
Enormous. And they're doing the best they can. And private schools are all over the lot here, right? And again,
do they have anything for such children?
They do. Some of them do much better than others, and you have to press as a parent. You have to press, and you have to try to press and press to get real information, not the brochure information. It's really tough. I mean, the advantage is if you are well off, you probably have more time, right, and more energy, and you're better equipped to ask the tough questions. And after all, your $50,000 is at stake. Whereas if you're one of 10,000 parents, you kind of just accept the IEP your kid is given. Not always. And you often of course you do your best, and maybe there's a lawyer involved, but it is tough.
Some parents are advocating to get on a 504 plan.
Yeah.
It's not given by the school, but they're fighting with the school.
They're fighting because they want the assistance. Yep.
Yeah.
And they should be. They should be fighting.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Steiner. Once again, so great having you on the show. Bye-bye.